Rhea Ripley has spoke the truth about WWE, and in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly what she had to say, what that truth is, and why it's so significant, because Rhea Ripley, she has been around for a minute. Not just the main roster, I'm talking about NXT UK. Remember that brand that they shut down a few years ago, and it's gone now forever. She also found a ton of success in NXT before making it to the main roster. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that Rhea Ripley was going to be a megastar from the get-go. I think it was far from it, because there was a lot of people, including herself, who compared her to Charlotte Flair. They looked the same, they had the same hair color, they were the typical WWE superstar. It's what WWE wanted out of its women's division, many years ago. So she opted to change her look up completely in NXT. Ironically, she put over Charlotte Flair at WrestleMania 36, with the NXT Women's Championship on the line. Since then, Rhea Ripley, she has had her highs and she has had her lows in WWE, whether it's under Vince McMahon or Triple H. But she has a connection with the fan base that is easy to understand. She's a likable person who works her tail off in the ring. She has charisma, she can work, she can cut a promo. She is everything that this company looks for in a WWE star. Now, that's not to say that WWE life is easy for Rhea Ripley, considering that just this year alone, she has been sidelined with 2 major injuries. Earlier this year, she suffered a shoulder injury, in which forced her to miss multiple months of action and vacating the Women's World Championship. Most recently, she suffered a broken orbital bone that has put her on the sidelines yet again. But Rhea Ripley knows that WWE life, it can be a grind. And this is something in which she talked about recently and talked about the women's division. So I'm going to talk about the state of the women's division in a moment. I'm also going to speak about Rhea Ripley's impact on WWE's women's division. Now, she did an interview with Jazzy World where she talked about the obstacles that women have had to overcome in WWE. She said this: being taken for granted, I think. The women in WWE, we've come a very, very long way. We've overcome a lot of obstacles that were put in our way. It has been growing each and every year. I think that was the biggest obstacle, just getting people sort of take us seriously. For the first time, or for the longest time, people joked about us being toilet break, which is just plain disrespectful. Especially when women go out there and leave everything that they have in the ring and we just go as hard as the men do. So they don't treat us with that respect. We're making people realize that we can go just as hard as the men, if not harder. Huge statement by Rhea Ripley. Why? Because she's speaking the truth. Years ago, we had this god-awful period in women's wrestling called the Divas era. They were not booked as the same of the men. They were not told to do things just like the men. In fact, they would get punished if they punched in their matches. They would have matches that would only go a few minutes. There was lack of storylines. It was more just eye candy for Vince McMahon and the creeps within WWE. That's what the women's wrestling was. That was what the women's division was in WWE for the longest time, and it absolutely sucked. But with change comes opportunity, because at NXT, Triple H and co., they opted to change the state of the business. They opted to give the women more opportunity. Sure, you had the pioneers of your Trish Strattus's and your Litas and your Ivories and your Mickie James from years prior. Then it transitioned into your Natalias, your Sarayas, and your Emmas. Also AJ Lee with her promos. But it wasn't until NXT, it wasn't until the Charlotte Flairs and the Becky Lynches and the Baileys and the Mercedes Monets that you really started to get a new crop of women's wrestling. They were working like the men. They were booked like the men. They were main eventing shows. They were putting on classic barn burners. That's what they were doing in NXT. That's what they were doing to change the culture of WWE. And sure, it took Vince McMahon a little bit to get on board with that, but once he did, he was fully on board. Even though Vince McMahon is a absolute creep, he did book the first ever women's WrestleMania main event. WrestleMania 35, 2019. Charlotte Flair, Becky Lynch, and Ronda Rousey. You got to keep in mind that Rhea Ripley is also part of that change because she's also part of the latest era. I've always broke it down as you had the women's revolution, evolution, and golden era of pro wrestling. Right now, we're in that golden era. Your Rhea Ripley's and your Bianca Belairs and your Liv Morgans and your Jade Cargills and soon to be your Roxanne Perez's and Stephanie Valkers and Julia. They've all been part of this. They've all been helping the business evolve, helping how things have changed with women's wrestling for the better. You want to have women's wrestling be good. You want women's wrestling to be taken seriously. Why? Because you're always going to have women's wrestling. It's been around for a while now, decades even. You want it to be good, right? You don't want to necessarily sit through a product that sucks. What's the point of watching if it sucks? The Divas era sucked. It was pointless. Yes, there were some bright spots, but for the most part, it absolutely sucked. I think you also have to give credit to the Bella Twins in this sense. While, yes, they weren't necessarily the greatest in-ring workers, I feel like Nikki got really better towards her end, but they also opened the door and gave new eyeballs onto the women's division through Total Divas and then later Total Bellas. That E-Network series, it helped bring in new fans. It helped set up the revolution because it made fans care, right? They tuned in. They're like, okay, this is fun. This is interesting. Why can't we get this on television? When we tune into Monday Night Raw or Friday Night SmackDown, why can't we get this? I want to see more of this. That's what that show was able to do. It gave opportunity to Rhea Ripley in NXT UK. It gave Rhea Ripley opportunity in NXT and on the main roster. And thank goodness she opted to go away from the quote-unquote stigma in which she was as a Charlotte Flair light type character, right? She went with a much darker persona in which helped change the course of her career and did so for the better. I don't know if we would get the same Rhea Ripley that we have today where she's in one of the hottest programs with Liv Morgan for the women's world title if she didn't make that very important pivot, that very important change. And for that, I'm thankful. And for that, I think you should be as well.